I guess the aim of this talk is perhaps just to give you an overview of motor neurone disease. Most of this, maybe some of this, is known to you, but perhaps there'll be new things that you'll learn, and hopefully you'll learn a lot more as the day goes on with the other speakers as well. So in this country and in many countries we use the expression motor neurone disease or NMD. In the United States, if we were having this talk in Chicago or Washington DC, they'd shake their heads, they'd say, what is that? They would recognise the words ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. Who was Lou Gehrig? Often diseases are named after the doctors who've described them or discovered them. But this Lou Gehrig was not a doctor but a patient, a very famous patient, one of the great baseballers of his time. And I'll talk a little bit more about Lou Gehrig as the talk goes on, about what happened to Lou Gehrig and why his story became so famous in the United States. At the midpoint of the 1938 season, Lou Gehrig's performance began to diminish. At the end of that season, he said, "I tired mid-season. I don't know why, but I just couldn't get going again." Throughout his career, he'd been an excellent base runner, but as the 1939 season began, his coordination and speed had deteriorated significantly. He was noticing he was slower. A sports reporter said, "I think there's something wrong with him. Physically wrong, I mean. I don't know what it is, but I'm satisfied that it goes far beyond his ball playing." I've seen ball players go overnight, as Gehrig seems to have done, but they were simply washed up ball players. It's something deeper than that in his case, though. I watched him very closely, and this is what I've seen. I have seen him time a ball perfectly, swing on it as hard as he can, meet it squarely, and drive a soft, looping fly into the infield. In other words, for some reason that I do not know, his old power isn't there. He is meeting the ball time after time, and it isn't going anywhere. What a remarkable description. And this is not a doctor, this is someone looking very closely at a person. There's something happening to him, and I think it's to do with his power. I don't know what it is, and only later was he diagnosed. But I think this is a great reminder of the power of observation when we look at people. On his 36th birthday, Lou Gehrig was diagnosed with ALS. Let's turn to motor neurone disease, as we call it here. The number of newly diagnosed patients every year is 2 per 100,000 population. The number of people with motor neurone disease at any one time around the world is 6 to 8 per 100,000 population. We run a motor neurone disease clinic at Calvary in Gehrig. And if our numbers, we know our general area, and if our numbers fall below that, we know that there are patients out there with the motor neurone disease who haven't yet been sent to us. We know that. So we try and make sure that all the neurologists, all the specialists who are doing the diagnosing know about our clinic so that they can refer the patients to us. The average age of onset is 58. Now, when you think about that age, you're thinking late working life, perhaps thinking of retirement, patients with their spouses who are maybe around about the same age, grandchildren, children, lots of things happening in a person's life around about that time. And now this issue's come. This diagnosis has been made. What will happen? Now, of course, half are below that age and half are above that age, but when you think about that, that's very important, isn't it? Approximately equal male and female. The cause of the disease, and everyone is interested in this, of course. Why is it that this has come to me? Is it something I've done? Is it something that I've been exposed to? Have I brought this on? Has somebody else brought this on? And the answer is we don't know. 95% we do not know. There are lots of theories that are talked about, but nothing definite. So I guess we continue to wait for that more definite sense of what's going on. About 5% a genetic. In other words, it runs in a family. So with those patients, when we first meet them, we need to explain what motor neurone disease is to a patient. But in those patients, they put up their hand and say, you don't need to explain because I've witnessed my father, my mother, my brother, my sister. So they know about the disease. But for the vast majority, this is completely new. This has come literally out of the blue, and we do not know its cause. In the unknown group, there are many theories, but no clear causative factor. Prior to diagnosis, there is usually a long lead-up time where the patient, their family and the doctors are not sure what is happening. And everyone in this room would know this experience. Sometimes going from doctor to doctor, specialist to specialist. Something's happening to me, to my mother, to my wife, but no one can really work it out. This can be a time of frustration, of course. Something's happening to the person, but we don't know what it is. And that's a very common story, in fact, usual story. And then finally, a neurologist will make the diagnosis and utter for the first time to you or to your relatives motor neurone disease. And whenever I meet a patient, I'll ask them, what was that moment like when you were first told? How much explanation was given about the disease? What kindness, compassion, understanding were you given at that time? Because that's a very important time as those words are first spoken about, as this diagnosis is first made. This time of uncertainty leading up to the diagnosis is usually a source of great frustration. Sometimes people say, once the diagnosis is made, a sense almost of relief. At last we know what we're dealing with now. Because for a long time we had no idea. Now we have a name. So there can be both the frustration and also at least we now know what we're dealing with thoughts as well. How does it present? About a quarter present with weakness in their hands or their legs. Okay. About a quarter present problems with speech, becoming softer in their voice or more slurred, or swallowing, coughing or spluttering with liquids often is the first thing. And about half have a combination of the limbs and the speech and swallowing. So, as Kate said, no patient is the same. No person is the same with this disease. There's so many different variations, but these sort of are the ways that it can present. With the leg story, of course, what can people notice for the first time is they stumble or they fall and think, what's going on here? Why have I fallen? I'm usually very sure-footed. And then they're diagnosed, then they're looked at and they say, oh, there's a problem with your ankles, the strength in your feet. And often at the time that is like, ooh, what could that be? And it may be only later that the whole story, the big jigsaw puzzle of this disease comes more evident, that it wasn't just that foot, but also there was something happening with the hand or the speech. As I said, speech and swallowing can occur, and as I said, about half can be a combination. It is a progressive, incurable disease. So, this means many things, doesn't it? It means that we do need, as Kate said, from the beginning, a team that's going to look after the person, to make sure that that person's okay, not to allow that person with the disease or their family to drift and drift and drift and see maybe the neurologist every couple of months, their general practitioner who may or may not have experience of motor neurone disease. So I think it does require an expert team, a team that hopefully you can go to and be comfortable with, who will anticipate what's going to unfold or may unfold, who's going to plan ahead and who's never going to abandon you. That's really important. That's extremely important. Because the opposite is a situation where the person feels as though they're drifting and no one's really following this. And now I'm falling, and now I'm struggling with my saliva, and now no one understands me, and now I'm in casualty at midnight, and and the doctors are not sure what's going on, and this is not a good situation. So I think that the whole role of a team is extremely important. And the skill of that team, bringing the skills, the combined skills of clinicians who've seen many, many patients with motor neurone disease, is hugely important, hugely helpful. Rather than, I'm not sure what to do here, versus, yes, I've seen this many times, and these are the things we're going to do because I think this will help you. The average time from diagnosis is 2.5 years, but that's the average time. 10% survive more than 10 years, so some patients will survive longer. The period from onset is marked by progressive deterioration in function and the capacity of the person, and often, and this is very important, an increasing burden of care on the family of the patient. So it's not simply, it's never just the patient alone, it's the patient and their family together and how they're all going. At the beginning, the person with motor neurone disease is maybe going reasonably well, pretty independent. But bit by bit, they're becoming more dependent. But what that means is the family's level of care is going to need to raise and become more and more in focus, if you like. Family members potentially needing to give up work, give up their usual activities. All of these different things can occur. And I think certainly being a member of a team, we see that all the time. And what level of care is being brought to the carers? How are they going? Turning to them is really important as well. The only medication that's been shown to slow the course of the disease is riluzole. And all of you would have heard of riluzole or Rilutec, the other name for this. It prolongs the life, according to those statistics, by about 3 months. So it's a modest improvement. We would love to have medicines that prolonged it far longer. We'd love to have a cure, of course. But at the moment, riluzole is the medicine. Just to reassure you, there's lots of research being done on other medicines to see if they will prolong the life of the person. And hopefully they'll be very successful and come to us as time goes on. Motor neurone disease is the disease or quintessential disease that requires a palliative approach from diagnosis. So I better explain what palliative means. I'm a palliative care physician. Many people, including my own colleagues, are not quite sure what all this is about. If I was standing up here as a surgeon or a heart doctor, you'd say, well, I'd have a sense of what this doctor's doing. But palliative care can be a little bit mysterious. So I'll just explain a little bit more about what that is. What is palliative care? So the WHO defines it as an approach that improves the quality in patients and their families. A life-threatening illness, motor neurone disease is a life-threatening illness. Prevention and relief of suffering, early identification. So palliative care is more than simply end-of-life care or terminal care. Palliative care can be involved in any illness, and I'd say particularly something like motor neurone disease very early, so that we're in there planning and working out what to do. Impeccable assessment, pain and problems, physical, so it's more than just simply the physical. So there's a lot in this definition. Often people are surprised. They say, oh, I thought palliative care was only for cancer patients. Yes, historically, palliative care did grow up in response to the inadequate care of patients with cancer, particularly when the cancer was more advanced. But over time, we started to realise that those same principles that we used there, the quality of life, the caring of the symptoms, etc., could be applied to other illnesses, including motor neurone disease. So over time, that started to move away from just there. And also, even senior doctors and many people say, but I thought palliative care was only for the dying person. Yes, we will care for the dying, of course, but we can be involved much earlier in these illnesses. Motor neurone disease, I think, does need palliative care or a palliative approach pretty well from the beginning, because you know that it's incurable, You do know that things are going to unfold. There's going to be symptoms. There's going to be issues for the patients and their families, and all these principles can be applied, really from the beginning. So, this is the McDonnell Ranges. I'm just putting this up as a metaphor. And when European settlers first came to this area, they thought this was God-forsaken, a desert country of no value. Why would we even have anything there? There's nothing there. But it was only into the 20th century when great artists like this artist, the great Aboriginal artist Albert Namatjira, he started to paint. People started to look at this with the eye of beauty. So when these were first shown in the cities, people said, the trees can't be that white, or the hills that blue. Well, they are, and Namatjira had a genius in capturing colour. So the reason I'm putting up this is that we can look upon the landscape of our patients, motor neurone disease, with both an active and palliative eye as well. So yes, there is the riluzole, which tries to prolong. Yes, there's the role of the neurologist, which is being very important, but it also can be the palliative role as well. The two eyes on the landscape of our patients, if you like. Probably the best unofficial definition I know of palliative care is this. This is written by a Queensland poet called Bruce Dorr. And as I read this poem, I'd like you just to think about, I guess, the sense of what this poem could be for a motor neurone disease patient. And the poem is called Whitewater Rafting and Palliative Care for My Late Wife Gloria. If I had understood when down the river you and I went swirling in that boat, that there are those who knew the ways of water and how to use the oars to keep afloat, I might have been less deafened by the worry, less stunned by thoughts of what lay up ahead, the rocks, the darkness threatening to capsize daily. If I'd only realised instead that help was all around me for the asking, I never asked and therefore never knew that such additional comfort could have helped me in turn to be more help in comforting you. I'd have found it easier then to simply hold you, instead of bobbing to and fro so much. For it was you who seemed to be more tranquil, and I whom death was reaching out to touch. If I'd only had sufficient knowledge in that whitewater rafting, I'd have learned that there are those around us with life jackets to whom I might have, in that turmoil, turned. Instead, because I had not thought of rivers, or rocks, or rapids, and gave way to fears that seeking help might make a man less manly and liable to betray himself with tears, I was less useful then, as twilight deepened, than I might well have been, had I but known, however wild the waves that roll around us, no one needs to live or die alone. It's great language, isn't it? And I think it's a great metaphor for this disease of suddenly being on the cascade of what is going on to me. What is wrong with my sister, my brother, my husband, my wife? What is unfolding here? I love the fact that on that boat is not just the patient, but her husband. The family are there as well, all the way down the cascade. And also it's interesting because it's a poem of great regret. I didn't know about this. Had I but known that there were those who knew the ways of water, things might have been a little bit easier for us. The poet's not saying, oh, palliative care would have got us off the river. No, it's not going to do that. But hopefully, with the life jackets, with the oars, it might make things a little easier as time goes on. So what are the needs of patients with motor neurone disease? Well, physical, we've spoken about that. Psychological, spiritual and financial. Remember the age story, because many people are now, bit by bit, or even at the beginning, are needing to stop work, or potentially their husbands and wives are stopping working, or their children. So lots of different aspects here. So this is perhaps all the members of the team. Not every single team will have every single member, but certainly I think that that's important to see. The nurse coordinator, absolutely pivotal. The person who's going to coordinate what's going on. The neurologist who's doing the diagnosing and following. Palliative care if it's possible. Occupational therapy in terms of equipment. Speech pathologist to help with both speech and swallowing. Gastroenterologist if it turns into a story where the person may need a tube for feeding. Volunteers. Respiratory specialist in terms of the breathing. Dietitian. the Motor Neurone Disease Association, who are here today, who are hosting this gathering today. So how important they are. Pastoral Care, how are you? How are you feeling? Those things. The spiritual dimension. Case manager, rehabilitation specialist, physiotherapist in terms of mobilising, safety, social worker, in terms of extra supports, the NDIS, etc., etc. Potentially a lot of people. Now that would be one crowded room, wouldn't it? if you had everyone in the one room. But mostly it's a smaller number, and it's perhaps a couple of members of those team and other people that we can reach out to. So it's not that everyone's going to sort of descend on you, but just to be aware that we can then connect you to, or make sure that you have availability of various people that will help. And I guess that represents the huge number of needs the patient's going to have, the motor neurone disease person themselves. Yes, there's going to be issues of speech and swallowing and moving, but also they need to have someone to talk to. They need to perhaps have some coordination with NDIS, the role of the Motor Neurone Disease Association, of course, as well. So just to reinforce that, to be aware of where to get information and support. I think one of the most critical things I see with patients at the beginning is, I don't understand what is happening. I'm hearing what you're saying, but I need more information, because we're naturally, as human beings, we're curious, or more than curious, we need to know what's actually happening around us. Now the information might be about the disease, but I also want to know what you can do about it, what you can do to help me. Who else is going to be here for me? The progression of the disease, as Kate said, is unique in every person. So no one story is the same. Often when we meet the person, they've already Googled, they've already looked at the stories and thinks, oh, and I say to them, look, those stories were those particular people. Your story, Mary or John, is your story. Let's perhaps put aside those other stories and let's concentrate on you. You don't need to do that. It's okay. And I think that the best approach is a clear, systematic and planned approach, so that there's a clear sense these things might occur and this is what we're going to do about it. That's very important. I'll just put this down here. That we marry whatever we say, it may be the speech is getting worse, the swallowing's getting worse, with what we can do about it. Because if we say, for instance, these 15 things are going to happen to you, and we sit back, the person's going to think, oh my God, I am completely on this cascade. I have no control. No one seems to, versus we have these issues and these are the things we're going to do about it. That helps hugely for the person. And that approach, this systematic approach, brings some calm and reassurance to patients and their families. And I've seen this over and over again. It sounds as though, Doctor, you understand. It sounds as though you have a team already assembled here for us. Yes, we do. I'm not going to go through in detail about each of these issues, because these successive speakers after I've finished will go through in more detail. So that's good, isn't it? So you'll get much more detail about each of these issues. Speech, very important, of course. I'm speaking now. All of us need to be able to communicate, and we need to be able to communicate more than yes and no. I want to tell you a little bit more about what I'm feeling here, what's happening to me on this Tuesday afternoon. So speech is very important, and I guess you'll get more information on that, but in essence, what can be used to assist you in terms of communicating when the speech is becoming more and more difficult. Swallowing. So the muscles, the swallowing, they often are affected, and I guess the question then is, you'll also get a talk on that topic later as well, and how that can impact on people. As I said at the beginning, it's usually with fluids right at the beginning where people notice that they cough or splutter with fluids. That's a clue or a sign that things are unfolding, and then what is possible as time goes on, and having those conversations early, but you'll have that discussion later. Saliva, you'll also have this. So this is very important. This whole story of what's happening with saliva, all array of different things. For those of you in the room with motor neurone disease, you would be very aware how things can change with your saliva. For those of you caring for patients, for your loved ones with motor neurone disease, you'd know that as well. So we'll come back to that and talk about that. Arms and legs. So of course, with the hands, of course, this is going to be a challenge, isn't it? Because we use our hands constantly, we use our legs constantly as well. But just in terms of what starts to unfold, in terms of then being able to use things like cutlery, being able to comb our hair, do our teeth, go to the bathroom, all these different things. But everything, holding a door open, all the mechanical things that we need that we take completely for granted, and what can happen there. And there'll be more talk on that as the day goes on. Legs, yes, this big issue then of what we call a falls risk, the possibility of you falling. We don't want you to fall, because falling can literally tumble you into a whole host of injuries and issues, the whole thing of your dignity. This is a really important aspect, and being very conscious about that. Where there's a foot drop, where the foot is not able to stay properly down, it keeps falling down, using orthotics or little braces around the ankle, and the role of a rehabilitation specialist as well. And then everything from a stick, wheelchairs, etc. But we'll talk about that later. Peripheral weakness, well, then we talk about physiotherapy, regular exercise, orthotics, walking sticks, and wheelchairs. Breathing, so just as those other muscles can be affected, the muscles of our breathing can be affected. So our lungs inside are okay, it's just that the muscles are struggling to breathe well. Now, right at the beginning, that's very, very subtle, hardly known, and there can be very subtle things that can occur. And there is a talk on respiratory later, which will go into what are the early signs, and if it's starting, what can be done about it, how that can be followed up. What would you need to know about that? Because that's important, rather than it's creeping up and then suddenly this is turning into a big story. So what's happening with the breathing will be talked about later. Psychological, well, the shock of the diagnosis. I think that's a very big moment, isn't it? It's interesting. For some patients, they have a strong sense that there's something more serious. Something's happening to me. Some people even work it out, that I think I might have motor neurone disease. Or it may be that they've never heard of this term before and now they're hearing about it. I think maybe less so, because there's been very high profile cases where people, motor neurone disease, the ice bucket challenge, various things that come into the understanding of the lay public, but certainly the shock of the diagnosis. What are the fears? Well, people have fears of being dependent. I am independent. I've been independent since I've raised as a toddler onto my feet, and I've been doing things independently. So I don't want to be dependent on people. I don't want people to be having to do things for me. These things are very strong. I don't want to be a burden to my family. They're busy enough, and I could see how hard it is for my husband, my wife, my children. I don't want to be a burden on them. I fear about choking to death. That's another fear that people talk about, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But all these fears can be there under the surface or right on the surface. So I think that they're things to perhaps talk about and think about and work it out. Because if they bury too below the surface, they can burst out like a volcano at some point, and that can be very hard and difficult. Interestingly, in one large study, choking didn't occur. So to say that people choke to death is not right. People die in other ways, but choking is not. NMD patients and their families can notice subtle changes also. So we've talked about the periphery, the arms, the legs, the breathing, swallowing and things, but there can be slight changes into the brain. And so things like a little bit of apathy, struggling to adjust to small changes, becoming emotional with small things, that can happen. Not everyone gets it, but sometimes that can happen, and families notice this. These can be very subtle, or not there at all, but it's certainly things that can do. So if you start to notice in yourself or a relative this, then it's probably to do with the motor neurone disease. About 10 to 15% develop what they call frontotemporal dementia. So that's a whole other story, where the frontal lobe, our lobe right at the front of us, is really literally our pilot, is guiding us to be, sensible and amenable to people and our personalities and how we are like this. So if that starts to be affected, that might then affect how that person is in terms of their personality, in terms of their ability to hold their frustrations in, that they burst out with, they're very frustrated, sometimes angry, even with very small things. They can struggle with what's going on around them. All of those things can be apparent, but that's that smaller group of the frontotemporal dementia. And I think if you're noticing that in yourself or a relative, then say to the doctors, is it possible that this is happening or not? Is it just something, is it just that I'm having a bad day today and that's why I'm like this? Yeah. All the above will need the full involvement and support of the carers. So that's really important, isn't it? And I'm very conscious of all of you who are carers in the room of what you're seeing, of what you're going through. No carer is involved in the same story, so it's only your story. But I think the NMD Association is very conscious, correctly so, and all the NMD clinics are very conscious of your role. And to say, it's okay to say, this is really hard, this is difficult, I am struggling, I'm not sure what to do now. So that's important, isn't it? And I think planning ahead is very important so that we understand and people understand what's going on. So saying, okay, at the moment, my speech is not too bad, my swallowing is not too bad, this is happening. But over time, things may change. So planning ahead is very important. Yeah, and also just gives you a little bit more sense of control. On the cascade of that river, a little bit of equilibrium here. Not so much, but a little bit more than just being buffeted constantly on that river. And what can be part of that planning ahead is literally what they call an advanced care plan. So I'll explain what that is. An advanced care plan is a letter to the future doctors. Dear doctors, for my future, I am now competent. I am now able to express my wishes. There may come a time later when I'm too ill and not able to speak to you, maybe not competent. So I would like now to let you know what I feel about things. And that's what an advanced care plan is in sense. So it starts to describe, if I would not be able to communicate with you or deem not competent, I would like the following things done. Number one, I would like you to turn to my husband, my wife, my children, and you can name them. Okay. Also, I would like the following things done or not done to me. So that's an interesting thing, because without an advanced care plan, you are now in a more extreme situation. You're not able to communicate. You're maybe deemed not competent. And now what's going to happen is the doctor and the patient's family are going to sit and talk. And the question's going to be, when she was well, what did she say? Oh, she never told us about anything. Did he make a plan? No, he never made a plan. Okay, so we actually don't know what he or she thought. And now we're in a situation where we have to surmise that, think about that, what he or she would wish. So an advanced care plan, I think, is a very good way, a letter to the future. Dear doctors, my future doctors, these are my thoughts as to what I think I'd like you to do or not do. Now, it could be simply as, I'd like you to keep me comfortable. If I'm very sick, just simply do the best for me. Just keep me comfortable. Or, I don't want to go to an ICU. I don't want to be put on a ventilator, a machine that would keep me breathing. I don't want, if I die naturally, allow me the peace to die, because I worry that if I'm resuscitated, I'm still got the motor neurone disease and only things are going to get worse. So all of those things come into play. So advanced care plan. There's another thing called the ambulance care plan. So this is, it's got a similar name, but this is what this is. I'm at home, and now I'm sick, And my family called the ambulance. The ambulance people come. They come in and say, "What's going on?" Well, my mother, my father's got motor neurone disease. Oh, okay. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to do this or this or this and this and this. Now, this is entirely in the hands then of the ambulance officers as to what to do. This plan gives them a guide. First of all, it explains Mrs. Jones has motor neurone disease. And motor neurone disease is the following. Mrs. Jones, we've talked to Mrs. Jones about what to do, and these are the things to do for her. And these are the medicines that you could use at the bedside. Go to an ICU. I don't want to be put on a ventilator, a machine that would keep me breathing. I don't want. If I die naturally, allow me the peace to die, because I worry that if I'm resuscitated, I'm still got the motor neurone disease, and only things are going to get worse. So all of those things come into play. So advanced care plan. There's another thing called the ambulance care plan. So this is it's got a similar name, but this is what this is. I'm at home, and now I'm sick. And my family called the ambulance. The ambulance people come. They come in and say, "What's going on?" Well, my mother, my father's got motor neurone disease. Oh, okay. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to do this or this or this and this and this. Now, this is entirely in the hands then of the ambulance officers as to what to do. This plan gives them a guide. First of all, it explains Mrs. Jones has motor neurone disease. And motor neurone disease is the following. Mrs. Jones, we've talked to Mrs. Jones about what to do, and these are the things to do for her. And these are the medicines that you could use at the bedside. I'll just pause here. Okay. So that's what the story about an ambulance care plan. So this is a plan for the ambulance officers when they come into the home. So it gives them some basic detail, the basic sense, and also some basic medicines that they could use, rather than having to say, "Oh, we're going to have to get you to the hospital really quickly here because we're not quite sure what to do here. We don't quite know which medicines to give," and all of that. So it's a very useful thing. So those two plans, an advanced care plan and an ambulance care plan. Is that okay? Yeah.
We'll detail those this afternoon.
Very good. And you'll go into detail more there later, which is very good because that's becoming more and more of a focus there. Okay. So Tony Judd was a great American academic. He was a great writer, and he developed ALS. And he wrote this remarkable essay called Night about what it's like at night with ALS. So he started to talk about it a little bit more. Well, he's describing it as a progressive imprisonment without parole. So I guess he's going straight to the heart of it, isn't he? No saving grace in being confined. Even the best meaning and most generously thoughtful friend or relative cannot hope to understand the sense of isolation and imprisonment that this disease imposes on its victims. It's very strong words, isn't it? Yeah. At night, my solution has been to scroll through my life, my thoughts, my fantasies, my memories, until I have chanced upon events, people or narratives that I can employ to divert my mind from the body in which it is encased. That's a fascinating insight, isn't it? I guess a very brilliant mind, but just the power of our minds in terms of if we're not able to do things, we can certainly remember things we've done. We can imagine doing things. We can reflect on things. This is one of our great gifts as a human being, is that we can think about things, even if we're not able to do those things. Okay? And thinking particularly about good memories and things that have happened, I think is a very powerful process. The pleasure of mental agility is so much overstated inevitably, as it now appears to me, by those not exclusively dependent upon them. Much the same can be said of well-meaning encouragements to find non-physical compensations for physical inadequacy. That way lies futility. Loss is loss, and nothing is gained by calling it a nicer name. So he's putting it there, isn't he? He's putting it very plainly. This is really hard. I am struggling. No one can make it nicer, because it's not nice. No one can sort of say, oh, well, you know, appeal to these things, because that may not be necessarily the case. Lou Gehrig. So, Lou Gehrig was diagnosed there, as I said, on his 36th birthday. On July the 4th, Independence Day, 1939, at Yankee Stadium, they had a farewell to Lou Gehrig Day. Now, he really didn't want to make a speech. In fact, he was okay, but I think he was struggling with everything on that day. But they implored him to make a speech. And what he said was the most remarkable thing. This speech became very famous, and it was televised, it was broadcast by radio around the United States and became very well known. So he started off by saying, "Fans, for the past 2 weeks you have been reading about the bad break I have. Yet today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. I have been in ballparks for 17 years and have never received anything but kindness and encouragement from you fans." He then goes on to describe his coaches and his managers. "Sure, I'm lucky. When the New York Giants, the opposition, a team you would give your right arm to beat and vice versa, send you a gift, that's something. When everybody down to the groundskeepers and those boys in white coats remember you with trophies, that's something. When you have a wonderful mother-in-law who takes sides with you and squabbles with her own daughter, that's something. When you have a father and a mother who work all their lives so that you can have an education and build your body, it's a blessing. When you have a wife who has been a tower of strength and shown me more courage than you ever dreamed of, that's the finest I know. So I close in saying that I might have had a bad break, but I have an awful lot to live for. Thank you." It's a remarkable off-the-cuff speech. You can't believe that's the eloquence of that man. So certainly when Lou Gehrig was diagnosed, even while he was still alive, it was being motor neurone disease, or ALS, was being called Lou Gehrig's disease in the United States. Interestingly also, he had a doctor. He had many doctors. But there was one particular doctor, Patrick O'Leary, that he would write to, because in those days people wrote. And so what would happen, he would describe to Dr. O'Leary what was going on, and Dr. O'Leary would encourage him and be very kind to him. At one point, Mrs. Gehrig wrote to Dr. O'Leary imploring him to say, don't tell him too much bad news. Don't do that. We're trying to hold his hope together. So that's interesting, isn't it, that the doctor sort of caught a little bit between the patient and the wife as to what to write in these letters. But it's a beautiful set of correspondence, really. His wife described him as he was like a great clock winding down. Bereavement. I guess that's a very important part. And certainly we there at Calvary, where I work, we do have a bereavement service, and we make sure that the patients, the relatives of those patients, have access to bereavement as they wish. So in conclusion, motor neurone disease is an incurable neurological disease. Multiple crises will unfold. Crisis management can be unplanned, chaotic and very distressing. So that's why the approach needs to be a team looking after you with a clear, systematic and planned approach. A sense of what may occur and what may be done about it. Marrying every description with what is possible to be done about it. For this to occur, a multidisciplinary team is optional. Complications and progression need to be anticipated, discussed and planned for. And there's always something that can be done. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Frank. I'm sure we have some questions in the audience for Frank. If you do, I'm happy to run a microphone out. If you'd like to put your hand up. Frank, are you still happy to stay
Yes,
here?
indeed, sure.
There are some questions. Anybody brave enough to ask a question? Or did Frank's beautiful talk just cover it all? I can see... Oh, thank you, Chad.
And the support that the MND patient may need, you listed out like physical, psychological, and spirit. I might need a bit more on that, on what sort of support you could do on that.
This is really important, isn't it? What each of those mean. I guess the physical is, would you like me to go through each of those? Or, yes, or the spiritual? So I can speak, certainly the physical, there's so many physical things that can unfold, and the role of that team is to deal with those issues as best we can and to focus on those. And hopefully that talk and the rest of this day will talk a lot about the physical.
Yes.
Then the psychological. Well, the psychological is very important, isn't it? The whole thing of hearing the news, what this means to me. As time goes on, the changes that I'm noticing. And there can be very strong, like a grief. I could speak, but I'm not able to speak as well. I could walk, but I'm not able to do that. And the sense of loss that people feel. Often people think, well, grief is to do with death. Well, yes, grief absolutely is to deal with death, but people can feel these griefs a lot earlier than that. So that sense, the sense of frustration, the sense of worry of how my husband or wife or my children are coping, all those really important things. For some people, they're very open and free to articulate that, to talk about that. Other people keep it quite private and really don't want to speak too much, or maybe to one person only they may trust, say the nurse or the social worker. And all it requires is one person or someone from the Motor Neurone Disease Association. That's really important, finding one person that you can speak to. Not to be fearful of speaking about that. It's okay, because it's very common, if not universal. The spiritual dimension, deeper stories. Who am I? What am I? Is the I and me purely here and now? Or is there something more long-lasting? Something that will live beyond me? Where is the meaning in my life? Prior to this disease, my meaning was with my family and my work and my hobbies. That was my meaning. That kept me going. Now I'm no longer able to work. I'm no longer able to do things as much as I could. Where is the sense of meaning in my life? What is my life? Those sort of deeper questions that start to come in. It may be issues of faith, of God and eternity and what will happen after I die. It may be. And certainly they are very common. But also it's that deeper sense of meaning. So when we talk about pastoral care, it used to be in the previous perhaps generation or so, pastoral care was like the Anglican chaplain, the Catholic priest. But in these days where there are many faiths and people of no faith, that's completely opened up to everyone. Not everyone has a faith, but everyone has spirituality. So I think it's the sense of the spirit of the person, how that is. Because people yearn to have that seen, recognised. I'm no longer able to do things. I'm much weaker, but I'm still a person. I'm still here. I am still John. I am still Mary. So I have my own dignity. Respect that. That's really important, isn't it? All those issues of things that come through, yeah.
Thank you. Is there another question? I see some, thank you.
Just the one thing that I noticed is a trigger for grief. If there's somebody just inadvertently says, "Oh, your son will be driving this through this car," and you go, "Bang!" Yeah. So managing that sort of grief to me is important. And the question I have for you is advanced care and ambulance care.
Can you hold the microphone just a bit?
Do you have a template for it?
Yes.
We'll actually cover that in detail this afternoon.
You do have
We
template.
will go into it, and we do have a template.
And that'll be very important,
Yes.
because rather than a sort of an amorphous conversation, you can sort of look at the aspects of that template and go through, okay, these are the important things to cover. Yeah.
And have you experienced that grief that you feel when somebody just triggers it?
Yes.
Just like general conversation, not meaning to do so.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very powerful thing. Yes, absolutely. I hear that, and I know exactly what you mean, where the smallest trigger could set that off, and you think, oh, I'm really responding very strongly to that. What is it about that? And maybe it's a story where you've had some things that have been building up, and then all it requires is a comment like that. Oh, that's really taken me aback. Yes, you're right. And that is a grief. That is a true sense of loss. You know, I'm now conscious. I'm more conscious of that. That's come to me. That is really hard. You're right.
Thank you for raising that. And we'll just have time for one more question.
It's just in my wife's situation, sometimes she gets a care or an OT or a physio, and all of a sudden they're not there any longer. So she feels that.
Yes.
She loses that.
Yes.
And then she has to work all over again to get that friendship back. So.
Yes. Isn't that powerful? Isn't that true? It's absolutely the truth. That particular person, yes, there's another occupational therapist knocking on my door coming in, but it was there was something about that person that I liked a lot. We got on well, and I'll miss that person, and indeed I might grieve the loss of that person. So all of that is true. That is very true. All of that's true. Yeah.
I know I said only one more question, but if somebody has just been waiting with their question, maybe not on this table. Seems like this is the hot spot, isn't it? Thank you.
Please do. Your talk was mostly about ALS, but what can you tell us about PLS?
Okay, very, very similar disease. There are some differences, of course, and no doubt your neurologists have explained that. But similar stories of power loss, of changes in the body. Yes, so you can, I think, adopt most of that talk into the sense of what PLS is about. I would certainly be continuing to ask or remind people that this is not exactly ALS, this is PLS. So what are the differences? What can you notice? But in general terms, the power loss, all those functional things are part of that as well. Yeah. I don't know whether a neurologist has explained that. So that's important as well, so that you've got a clear sense of that, because it may be that doctors may have a sense of ALS or NMD,